Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 20th annual SF DocFest. We're kind of bringing some more kind of interesting, independent, and eclectic documentaries from around the world. Um, you know, had a really special documentary today that you've had a chance to see, Chasing Childhood, which I think really fits within just the kind of vibe of what we've been doing at SF DocFest for 20 years. So when this film came through submissions, was excited to be able to see if we could share it. So we're lucky enough to have the directors here of the film, Margaret Munzer Loeb and Eden Wormfeld. Welcome to SF DocFest.
Thank you.
So, you know, needless to say, this is, I think, a really interesting subject matter to kind of explore. But, like, what inspired both of you to kind of go down the rabbit hole and knew that there was this kind of documentary you wanted to make?
The way that this happened was Eden and I were sitting on a couch in the room I'm in now and talking about how we were raising our kids. This was, I don't know how many years ago now, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, it feels like. Our kids were
much younger.
much younger, right? So they were substantially younger. Just kind of talking about how we were raising our kids differently than the way we were raised in New York City, and why I'll say my then maybe 9 or 10-year-old, or maybe it was 11 even, I don't know, was not allowed to be wandering the city yet the way that we were. And we started chatting about it. And I think Eden was probably ready to give her kids more freedom, but tried to take on, like, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Is this our imagination? That was really the question that started the process.
And so when you first start kind of making it, the idea is that you had this kind of inkling, but I guess, did you kind of go in with like an open mind, or what were you hoping to kind of share with the world of the kind of different kind of contradictions in which way parent our kids, or like what was it that you're kind of hoping to explore, do you think?
Well, I think that what originated, as Margaret said, with a conversation that was just anecdotal and kind of genuine questioning about, was it really as different as we think it was, or are we just kind of remembering with rose-colored glasses, or somehow, misremembering? And I've said this many times, but I thought I was coming home in first grade by myself and letting myself into my house and crawling up on the counter and getting cookies down and getting my own snack and all this kind of thing. But then when I went back and looked through photos, I actually found a photograph of myself with my key around my neck in my first grade classroom. So it was confirmation that it actually was that young. It wasn't like, I thought it was first grade, but it was actually fourth grade, And so then Margaret often speaks of her, having to take 2 public buses by herself to get to school in 3rd grade. And at that time that we were having this conversation, she had a 3rd grader, or maybe even a 4th grader or 5th grader, who wasn't doing that. And it wasn't like he was the outlier, no one was doing that. So then, and we were like, okay, New York City is a much safer place today than it was in the 70s and 80s. So it's not because it's actually so dangerous. So, like, what is happening? And so that launched a much more serious inquiry on our part of, reading lots of books of some of the experts who are in the film. And I think that what began as kind of an anecdotal and a genuine question on our part as parents, because I think all parents, we just want to do our best for our kids, and we love them, and we want to do right by them. And I think what started as this kind of smaller question about our lives in New York City, because we happen to be raising our children here as well as having grown up here, it came into focus that there was somewhat of a national epidemic among children of record levels of anxiety and depression. And so we started to try and unpack that with some of the experts that we had access to. We did actually interview on camera many remarkable people who are not in the film who did inform our process. But I think the film was really made, differently than I have made films in the past, where it started out with themes and ideas and questions, not with a story or a character. And so then we had to figure out, okay, how do we actually explore these themes and questions in the context of a story? Because that's the only thing that anyone ever really wants to watch. And so that was really challenging, actually, and our very first interview was with Lenore Skenazy, who is featured in the film. She's the founder of the free range kids movement and started the organization Let Grow, which you learn about in the film. And we had been introduced to her through Margaret's husband. And she, I don't know how much to say if people will have watched the film when they.
We'll assume that most people have seen the film when they've watched the Q&A, and if not, then they too bad for them on the spoilers.
Okay. So she was donned the worst mother in the world when she let her 9-year-old son ride the New York City subway by himself from Bloomingdale's home. I think Bloomingdale's is on 59th and Lex, and they lived on 30th Street in like the East River or something like that. So he took a bus south, and then he got on a crosstown bus and went east. And, like within 24 hours of her having written an art. So she did this not as a publicity stunt. And then a couple of months later, because she was a journalist on a local beat, her editor was like, do you have anything? And she's like, I could write about my son having done this. And she's like, oh, that's great. It's a good local story. It'll be sweet. And it blew up. And then within 24 hours, she was donned the worst mother in the world. And she was on all these, news outlets being kind of grilled about her, why she would do this and endangering, kind of putting her child in harm's way, seemingly. But she didn't believe she was putting her child in harm's way. She actually believed that, she was doing right by him because he was expressing interest in doing it and he seemed developmentally ready. And so, I think through her, her trajectory from journalist to activist really in this space led us to the 3 geographic locations that are featured in the film. And, I think we ended up there. We filmed in a lot of other places and we filmed, nationally, but we decided to kind of try and focus the film in the tri-state area in 3 different types of neighborhoods, both socioeconomically, and then also we have like urban, 2 suburban neighborhoods and 1 urban neighborhood. She led us to those places because she knew they were places that were exploring these questions and that were open to trying to shift culture. So that's a long answer.
Well, as you kind of went down, like, what do you think most surprised you that you didn't kind of anticipate? And like, I mean, also did like the making of the film, did it change the way that you dealt with your own kids, I guess?
I will jump in to that. 2 different questions. The most surprising thing, well, I think one of the most surprising things was, and it was both in the research and in the making of the film, was how prevalent some of what we thought were some of the issues of New York City were everywhere. And I think that I found that pretty surprising. And I think the sort of parenting on steroids to get your kid into college, I don't think I was aware of how extreme that was. And I don't know that I was so aware that play outside in what would be seemingly safe neighborhoods had evaporated before the making of it. In terms of like raising my own children, and I think certainly Eden, this is true. I think my children are pushing me to give them more independence. So I don't know if that's like I'm pushing myself, but because they've grown up with me making this film, they have kind of gained the vocabulary and the language and the gumption to say, you know what, this is good for me, Mom. I can do this. There were certain categories of things I was giving them more freedom to do, mostly like cooking and using sharp things. I would say I was really good about navigating the world on their own, probably like on the streets, probably less. And they've definitely been asking more for that. And I've taken their lead, which I feel like Julie and Lenore helped me. So I thank you, Julie and Lenore and Peter and everybody else.
I think the thing that was most surprising to me in the making of the film was how, like Margaret said, it was these issues were playing out in many different neighborhoods and many different types of places, but that everywhere we were, people thought it was just where they were. And if only, like, in the people in the suburbs were like, well, if we lived in the city, it would probably be so much better because, you know, you have sidewalks and, you know, you don't have to drive to get around. And people in the city were like, oh, well, if we lived in the suburbs, that would be better. You know, like it just was very striking to me that everyone just thought it was happening only where they were. And then it definitely impacted my parenting somewhat, but mostly because I think, as Margaret indicated earlier, I was a little more inclined to let my kids do some things maybe earlier than is culturally acceptable, but certainly when my kids were developmentally ready, like my older son was asking to go around in the neighborhood by himself and, you know, get a grocery list and bring things home for us and be helpful and this kind of thing. And I was letting him do that, but I was very secretive about it because I thought that if people found out that they wouldn't feel comfortable letting their kids come over and they would think it was unsafe and I would be mommy shamed. And I actually was mommy shamed on more than one occasion. But what was helpful in the making of the film was that Julie in particular and Lenore really helped me like come out about it, like just not to be hiding it, you know, but not to, you know, I hadn't any agenda really other than that I was doing something that I thought was the right thing for my kids. And I think that it is really particular and each child and each family situation is different. So obviously all those things need to be taken into consideration. But when you have kids asking to do things that historically they have done at the age that they're asking, or even earlier, that you might consider what Julie gives as guidance is like, first you do it for them, then you do it with them, then you watch them do it, and then they do it on their own, you know? And so I felt like that was really helpful way to codify it, you know, because I think it is really scary to let your kids go. And, you know, the first time my kid took the subway by himself, it was terrifying. And then like I had to call another parent who was at the practice that he went to be like, did he get there? You know, is he still alive? So, you know, it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy.
No, yeah, I just from personal, I have a 4.5-year-old now, and it's one of those things you go into parenting sometimes with this confidence about like how you're going to do it, and then obviously social pressures fall into place, or you know, there's definitely more at stake, and you're just like, you know, navigating these questions can be so difficult because yeah, none of us want to be, you know, shamed as parents, you know, but at the same time, you know, yeah, as you mentioned, every kid is at their own kind of own developmental stage and figuring what is right for your family. So, you know, this last year's been really strange with the pandemic. Like, is there any takeaways from how you think this kind of film might resonate in this kind of post-pandemic environment?
Yeah, we've been spending a lot of time thinking about how the film would resonate in both a post-pandemic and a, frankly, not totally out of the pandemic way, since we've been on this festival circuit during various lockdown time. I think that a couple of things. One, you know, some people have found that during this time their kids have actually gained more autonomy. I mean, in all the ways that they can't necessarily, there were times you couldn't go out and do things maybe on your own. Most kids' extracurricular lives have been really scaled back. And so people have had to be creative about having their kids go out and play, maybe even go out and play eventually. Obviously, this has been a year, so it's been different times, but maybe you're out in a mask and you're allowed to play outdoors in the neighborhood. I mean, I certainly saw in New York City, Central Park totally come alive in a way that I'd never seen it before. It was always much more organized, especially in the after school days. Maybe you were doing school from home, and that was a lot for working parents. So kids took on tasks around the house that they might not have normally done. So I think that some of the things that I've heard is like, what do we want to keep from this time? And what do we want to actually return to? So as parents are thinking about a more normal fall, hopefully, knock on wood, do you want your kid enrolled in things 5 days a week? Do you want to have a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old in a whole bunch of quote unquote classes or do we want to retain some things from this time? And so we're sort of hoping that the film lands with people while they're kind of making those decisions about what it all could look like, and maybe, maybe rethinking how their kids should be spending their time from pre-pandemic.
And the assumption is most people have seen the film when they did the Q&A, but obviously not everybody is a parent or chooses to be parents. But what do you think is important for just us as society to keep in mind? Because obviously the kids are our future. And what is it that basically the kind of takeaways you hope for an audience, whether you're a parent or not, in the way that we live life, or I guess organize society?
I think we should both comment on this. If we have time, I just want to say that as a society, I think that we need to be valuing time for people to be living in the present. And one of the great things about thinking about children and play is, that's really where you learn how to do that. I think during this time, it's been really challenging with email and text and feeling like work is home and home is work, to actually feel that feeling of play that you should feel for the rest of your life. And so I hope that the film is not just about raising kids, but is also a call for us all to kind of recognize the value in the kind of freedom and joy and social relationships that are not intended to have any sort of outcome or gain or purpose other than for those that, other than for the thrill of play.
Yeah, I mean, I would just, so there's two things I want to say, one in direct relation to what Margaret just said, which is that a lot of the people we spoke with who were young adults but had grown up in a childhood culture like the movie is showing, would talk about how they really didn't know what they loved. They had no idea what they truly enjoyed doing because they'd been so programmed that they never had time to explore that. And then, I mean, another thing that I hope is somewhat of a cultural takeaway, and I think it's a much bigger issue that's not, that's bigger than this film, is just this idea of specialization and how it geared towards specialization we are as a culture, but how young that starts. And this idea that, I mean, because people are starting to specialize at such a young age, it's very hard to join a soccer team, for example, if you've never kicked a soccer ball before you're 11 or 12 years old, which was common when we were growing up, because kids are starting at 3 or 4. And if you've had a certain level of training, a certain number of days a week for all those years, it's just going to be very hard to catch up unless you're some kind of complete phenom, right? But I think that there's something really lost in specialization, which I think is unfortunate on so many levels. I mean, there are also positive aspects probably of specialization, but for most of us who are not going to be, virtuosi in any given activity, it seems like more is lost than gained when we don't have the opportunity to explore, as Margaret was talking about, just like getting bored and, what do you come up with and what games are you going to invent? And, maybe I like soccer, but I also like to drum, and maybe I want to stare at a wall, and that's okay too. I think that many of the kids we encountered in the making of this film just didn't even know what free time could look like. And I think in the pandemic, a lot of us have experienced free time or time just differently than we had in the last couple of decades. And certainly I hope to carry forward and preserve a little bit of that. I mean, as hard as this time has been, and it has been excruciating at times, and really hard for everyone in different ways in my orbit, there are things that I consider silver linings. And one of them was having all of our schedules turned way down. And I'm like, I don't want to go back to the way it was before. It was too hard. Like, I don't want to start my day at 6 a.m, walking the dog, packing lunches, running around, like shuttling people for this practice and that practice. And, it's kind of a nightmare. And I kind of have thought a lot about, well, yes, that is the cultural norm, but what are we giving up in exchange for that? And I feel like too many of the values that I really hold dear are being lost in that. And it's not necessarily what I want for my family. So that's something that I hope to carry forward from COVID, because I am somebody whose kids, we had 3 travel teams in our household over the last 10 years simultaneously. And, my husband and I are often dividing and conquering, one's in Delaware, the other one's in Maryland, someone's in New Jersey, and that's a lifestyle choice. And I think I maybe don't want that lifestyle.
Well, we had a little bit of a Zoom hiccup there, but I think that gives a lot to kind of ruminate on, and would heartily agree, and hopefully, as we kind of move forward, some of these ideas that you guys have kind of explored in the film kind of take shape and change our world. As you get the film out there in the world, what's the best way for people to kind of continue to follow its efforts? And also, if they want to kind of dig in to learn more, what's the best way to do that? And I always kind of recommend that, like, folks that are watching the film here at the festival, you're the street team for our filmmakers. So I would hope that you get on social media and kind of share that you've seen this great film, Chasing Childhood, and what you thought about it, and kind of help amplify the message. So yeah, what's the best way to follow your guys' efforts?
Go to chasingchildhooddoc.com. And, we are launching a community screening campaign, and we are happy to come to you or to anyone's school or community or church or temple excited to bring it and talk to you about it.
And there is going to be a national release at the end of June with Abrama Rama, and then this back to school tour that's happening that people can start scheduling now. So chasingchildhooddoc.com is where you can get all the info.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Eden and Margaret, for being part of SF DocFest, and just thanks again for exploring such an interesting idea and kind of telling the story in such a captivating way.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Chris. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Audience. Bye.
Bye.